Hi all, for our notable game today, let's look at another interesting game of Rashid Nezhmetdinov. This time he was black here in 1953 against Mikhail Vasilievich Shishov. This was in the USSR Team Championship played in Leningrad, 1953. Shishov was playing board 1 for the Georgian team. Nezhmetdinov was playing for the Russian team, ahead of quite distinguished players that you may have heard of, including Lizitsyn, who was an IM, Krogius, Polgiavsky. Yeah, he was on board 1, playing for the Russian team here. Let's see what happened. So e4 from Shishov. Nezhmetdinov played classically e5. No Sicilian defence here. Classic Roy Lopez. Very well trodden territory. Now, we come to a point here where usually at this point, black plays the move d6, stabilizing e5, facilitating knight a5. So the usual continuation is actually h3 to stop the pin, and then games continue like this. Not here though. White maybe prepared something dangerous for Nezhmetdinov, knowing perhaps he's an attacking player. He actually played in this position instead of h3, the move d4, and many of you may be wondering, can you play this? Do you have to play the move h3? The problem is black plays now bishop g4. This is meant to be okay for black, this pin here, because by putting pressure on d4 it's encouraging white to close the center with d5 or have to play bishop e3. This was meant to be about equal. Say bishop e3. This type of position is supposedly it's about equal, and d5 as well is supposedly about equal. Black can again put the knight here for a moment and break up the center with c6. This is interesting. You might think b4. This is okay. Black's going to regain his pawn and get a Sicilian type position, actually semi-open c-file there potentially. So yeah. So h3 is often played, but yeah, so we have this bishop g4 though, because white actually played d4 instead of h3, played d4, so allowing this pin. So what's the problem, or what's the issue? Bishop e3 and d5 are known to be about equal. White's idea is more aggressive here. He's turning it into a gambit with his next move, h3. This is now officially a gambit. Nezhmetdinov takes on f3 and takes the center pawn. And the idea is the queen retreat, not taking with tempo allowing a fork, but the queen retreat, saying to black, I'm going to get back my pawn if you don't take on c3. Black does take on c3, a pawn up, but look at white's position. White's position seems very good. The bishop pair locking down on d5. Black's position looks a bit passive. We see knight a5 as Nezhmetdinov establishes some control on d4 with his pawns, c5 pawn. f4, very aggressive stuff, as though in the future with some preparation e5 might be good to knock out the defender of h7, maybe get an attack. Knight c6, as though knight d4 is really on the cards now. White stops that. Rook c8, the rook might be useful on c8, maybe knight d4 in the future. The rook would support things like later, if ever this pawn was taken, maybe d5 and bishop c5. In this respect, white takes the king away from the potential dangers of that diagonal. Bit of prophylaxis here from white. We see rook e8 as though bishop f8 and g6 are on the cards now. Put some pressure on e4. a3. Discouraging any b4. We have bishop f8. So black, a pawn up, looks to be intending g6, and then maybe either bishop g7 or even bishop h6 here could be handy. Bishop f2. We see g6. With bishop f2, the pin looks quite dangerous, but this is just ignored, g6. Now a hyper-aggressive move from white, g4. Hyper-aggressive. White with the bishop pair, it would seem he's not too concerned about the vacuum he's left behind here around his king. Is there any snags with this? Is black just going to be pushed back? Maybe soon even g5 with some preparation might be playable. Maybe, you know, if the queen shuffles here, put some pressure either on d6 or maybe even reroute the bishop to cover h5 and then maybe g5. All sorts of possibilities, basically. Is this vacuum really a problem for white? A very energetic move indeed now by Nezhmetdinov. Can you guess what black plays here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, starting from now. Black is not content with a passive position. And if he is content, you know, white could use his extra space soon with great effect. Black plays the energetic knight d4, ready to return back a pawn, hitting that important bishop on c2, which could be dangerous in the future. White snaps this off and gets his pawn back. So what's the idea here? Why has black done this? Well, he has already robbed white of the bishop pair, but there's an important tactical idea now, that the queen has been taken to d4. Can you guess? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play here with black, starting from now? 500 points if you can get this move. Knight takes g4 check. The queen is no longer protecting for that moment in time. g4. So the pawn has to take here. Or does it? White avoided pawn takes. It's just too dangerous. It's too losing, in fact. If pawn takes, then check. Queen takes. And d5 here is really mega strong. Threatening bishop c5, getting onto that diagonal. If knight takes, threatening knight f6. Black carries on with queen h3 check, check, and this is just winning easily, skewing the queen. No time for black to do anything there if it's all running with check. So it's too dangerous to take that knight. We have king g2. The queen comes in anyway, still offering the knight. It's still too dangerous to take it. This idea of the liberating d5, this bishop coming to the diagonal, is far too dangerous. Bishop b3. White tries to get a grip on things, hoping black will retract his pieces. He's not going to. Bishop g7. Trying to lure the queen away from defensive duties. e5, shielding the queen. But now another tactical blow against white. Can you guess? Okay, not the simple d takes. Plain vanilla doesn't really work too well. Compared to knight takes e5. Yes, use the pin. Knight takes e5 is possible. Horrible stuff. Vicious. Queen e4, and the viciousness continues now. It looks as though white's kind of pinning the knight. If the knight moves, it looks as though, well, 2 rooks is good, isn't it? Black to play here. What would you play here with black? Are you scared of this pin on e8, or do you not mind it? What would you play here with black? Fearlessly, knight d3, skewering the queen against the rook. The queen has no choice here, otherwise the rook's going to drop off. If queen takes, we're just going to take this rook on e1 here. The firepower of the queen on h4. White, for the moment, actually didn't play queen takes e8, but rather bishop takes f7, check. Trying to get Nezhmetdinov in trouble, trying to bring the king out. The king doesn't have to come out to play here, which might be quite dangerous. Let's just check this for a moment. Could the king have avoided to even take here? It seems as though the position is so good for black that even this position is okay for black. But yeah, so even that's possible. But no, Nezhmetdinov sidestepped with king f8. Also king h8 is even possible. The position is just so good for black. On king h8, you know, this leaves bad choices for white, because the queen and knight are coordinating so well here. And if rook takes, then king g7, yeah, and the king's carnivorous as well. So even that's possible here. The position is so strong, but Nezhmetdinov chose king f8, good as well. We have bishop takes, knight takes f4 check. So temporarily, black, what is he doing? He looks to be material down, is he? Now he's just given up a rook, a whole rook. But, you know, he has dangerous possibilities. He could even take here, because if king takes, then there's bishop h6 checkmate. Yeah, even queen takes h3 is possible. And if king f2, even this position, this is horrible for white, absolutely horrible. Okay, and if king g1, we've got other horrible stuff approaching, you know, like check and bishop d4 check if the queen stepped back. So yeah, it's all pretty horrible, but actually rook c4 is also really strong, protecting the knight and still threatening queen takes h3 now that knight's protected. White protects h3 actually, giving up his queen. It's two rooks versus the queen basically, if you factor out the knight and bishop on both sides. But black has two extra pawns. He supports the knight on e5. White was threatening rook takes f4. More pressure using the pin. But now a counter resource, unpinning the knight. So threatening knight takes d5 and queen takes d7. So basically simplification now ensues. Knight takes f4. Queen takes d7. We have h4. Queen f7, keeping a nice pin. King g7. The pressure is building here against white after queen f5. Things are brewing against the pin, for example. Maybe h6 and g5 is coming along. We have rook g1, seemingly stopping any stuff like that. But weakness of the last move, unfortunately. d5, yeah, no longer rook takes e5 is possible. The rooks, when doubled, were stopping d5. Now it's possible, crushing, getting more material. White having to sack the exchange there. This is just hopeless against the mighty queen. d3, h takes. And here, white resigns. It's totally hopeless with this big passed pawn as well. As an example, if rook takes, queen takes, you know, black can just play d2, queening here. That's how bad things have got now. So what do we get from this game? Well, theoretically, it's an important line to know as black in the WhiteElo pairs, because you'd think players are routinely playing this h3 move, and you might wonder, hold on a sec, one day the opponent doesn't play h3 and invites you to play bishop g4, and then they play a scary looking gambit sacrificing a full centre pawn. How do you deal with that? Well, Nezhmetdinov shows use the extra pawn, control d4, and if necessary, if white goes for your king, creates a vacuum. Before the vacuum gets hold, there's a critical moment there in the lifetime of a vacuum of weaknesses around the opponent's king that you want to pounce on. With the knight, you want to sacrifice, counter-sack a pawn. Beautiful knight sack counter to try and rip open and exploit the vacuum around the opponent's king. White's position started crumbling then on the dark squares. Very energetic play from black basically to exploit the weaknesses at the right time. So the gambit kind of refuted in a way. Nezhmetdinov just played calmly, rearranging his pieces and waiting for the right moment for the counter pawn sacrifice to ignite his piece play. Fantastic stuff on board 1 against the Georgian number 1. The Russian number 1 prevailed. Rashid, Nezhmetdinov. Okay, hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks so much.